There are many sagas sung about the tales of individual Viking heroes from across the ages. Sometimes they fight alongside or against recurring characters, but for the most part, it seems that the focus is on them. Today, however, we will focus on the rare occasion where an entire unit proved worthy of its own legend. They are the Jomsviking mercenaries.
You can learn much more about the epic history of medieval Scandinavia through our sponsor, Wondrium. Wondrium offers subscription-based on-demand videos covering a huge range of subjects from history to science, travel, art, hobbies, and more. These come delivered in a variety of packages, from your more academic courses to well-produced documentaries, exclusives, and more. I can highly recommend their 26-part series, The Vikings, hosted by Dr. Kenneth Harl. In it, he provides an extensive overview of their history, starting from the Bronze Age through the Celtic and Roman eras and on to the Middle Ages. It does an excellent job tracing the broader historical arc while weaving in smaller moments and elements of daily life which bring out the human element of the story. My mind was blown by the episodes on the Christianization of the Northmen, as it's fascinating to follow the merging of cultures and watch the ripples of change flow through all aspects of society. Right now, Wondrium is offering a free trial, which you can start by clicking the link in the description below or visiting wondrium.com/invicta. I highly recommend that you take a look at what they have to offer and dive into the material that you are most interested in. Enjoy.
Right off the bat, it must be stated that the Jomsvikings are at the very least a semi-mythical unit with very little that can be confirmed historically. What survives to the modern day are a scattering of written records and a handful of artifacts from disparate locations. The meat of their legend primarily comes to us from the Jomsvikings saga, which exists in 4 Icelandic versions with 1 additional Latin translation. Beyond this, they are passingly mentioned in the King's sagas, the Heimskringla, the Fagraskinna, the Nightlinger, and the greater saga of Olafur Tryggvason. Taken together, these records allow us to paint a somewhat cohesive story of the Jomsvikings. However, just because we can write books about their exploits doesn't make them true. In fact, scholars greatly debate the veracity of their tale, in which many figures or events are believed to be fictitious or, at the very least, greatly exaggerated. Suspiciously, the closer we get to the records from the period of their supposed existence, the more they recede from our view. This has all the hallmarks of a legendary tale. Likely there is some seed of truth at the core of the Jomsvikings, but unraveling fact from fiction is virtually impossible. Thus, it will be best to take our episode today with a healthy dose of skepticism. That being said, the Jomsviking unit, legendary or not, was certainly inspirational to real people in a similar manner to the Myrmidons of Achilles, and is well worth studying. With that disclaimer out of the way, let us proceed. As we mentioned, there are several sources which tell the tale of the Jomsvikings. Each of these weaves its own narrative. Choosing just one leaves gaps, while choosing them all leaves contradictions. Therefore, we will be doing our best to stitch these together in the most cohesive and accurate manner. Based on this approach, it seems that the Jomsvikings were probably founded in the late 900s AD. Tradition claims that this was done by the legendary Danish hero Palnatoke. However, another possible candidate is King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, who spent much of his reign fortifying the realm with strategic forts and other construction projects. One saga makes this claim explicitly. Quote, King Harald Bluetooth raided in the lands of the Wends and had a great stronghold built there at a place called Joam. And since then, that stronghold has been called Joamsborg. He put a commander in charge of it and himself returned to Denmark. And for a long time there was hostility between the Wends and the Danes, and each side made raids in the lands of the other. To this day, there is much dispute about the true location of the city. However, the recent discovery of a new historical chronicle points to its existence at the northwesternmost corner of modern Poland, near the town of Wolin. It is here that researchers have confirmed the presence of some objects from the period, but this is far from conclusive. Meanwhile, others continue to argue for various competing sites, some of which have since been overtaken by the sea. Simply put, the debate is far from settled. Regardless of where we might pin Jomsvikings on the map, we can at least give you its description from our sources. These indicate that the settlement sprung from the multi-ethnic market town of Jomna, where, among the Danes, one could find a large number of men from eastern lands. Here is how one later Christian source puts it. At the mouth of the river where it feeds the Scythian marshes, Jomna, a most noble city, affords a very widely known trading centre for the barbarians and Greeks who live round about. Because great and scarcely credible things are said in praise of this city, I think it is of interest to introduce a few facts that are worth relating. It is truly the largest of all the cities in Europe, and there live in it Slavs and many other peoples, Greeks and barbarians. For even alien Saxons also have the right to reside there on equal terms with others, providing only that while they sojourn there, they do not openly profess Christianity. In fact, all its inhabitants still blunder about in pagan rites. Otherwise, so far as morals and hospitality are concerned, a more honourable or kindlier folk cannot be found. Rich in the wares of all the northern nations, that city lacks nothing that is either pleasing or rare. Yet the settlement was not just a commercial centre. According to the Jomsvikings saga, it would now be reinforced by the construction of a formidable fortress which would serve as the home for many hard-bitten warriors. The sagas mention how its port was defended by a gated entrance, which passed under a great stone archway. This may have been a natural formation, or more likely it was a man-made part of the circle-style castles commonly constructed by Harald Bluetooth. Such bastions were made of wooden walls, half encompassing an urban hub on land and half defending a harbour on the water. The sagas in this case claim that the Jomsvikings port was large enough to hold 360 ships. Though such a claim is highly dubious, it likely speaks to the impressive nature of the position. But it wasn't just the fortress itself which inspired legends. The people within were its true claim to fame. In this regard, our sources indicate that the men who made their way to fill this new bastion considered themselves as being a cut above their fellow Norsemen. For instance, rather than falling in line along traditional social hierarchies, the Jomsvikings developed a unique brotherhood whose bonds superseded any other pre-existing relations. In a manner similar to the Knights Templar, they were also said to have followed a strict set of codes which enshrined their exclusivity and legendary status. These went as follows. 1. No man younger than 18 or older than 50 could be enrolled. 2. Kinship was not to be taken into consideration for recruitment. 3. No man may run from an opponent who was as resolute and well-armed as himself. 4. No man may indicate fear by speech or be frightened in any situation. 5. Jomsvikings must avenge one another as brothers. 6. Anything of value gained on expeditions must be equally shared among the entire group. 7. No man may stir up contention. 8. No man may spread rumors. 9. The leader is to disseminate all news. 10. No man may have a woman in the fortress city. 11. No man may be absent from the city for more than 3 days on personal business. 12. The leader is to have the final say in any dispute, especially in anything involving kinslaying, even that which may have occurred outside of the brotherhood. In this manner were the ranks of the Jomsvikings forged. Let us now take a closer look at each individual warrior. Generally speaking, they would have donned similar gear to the other Norsemen of the region. However, as we shall soon discuss, they served as a renowned mercenary group and thus had both the need and the means to equip themselves in a manner which was superior to your common farmer levy. Instead, Jomsvikings were likely closer to professional housecarls troops, who would have had a full kit, richly adorned with carvings and gilding. In terms of defense, this meant donning a shirt of chainmail or lamellar armor, akin to their brothers who traveled south to the land of the Greeks. In addition, they bore a traditional Norse helmet and shield, which provided ample protection but would have featured additional visual flair. For offense, spears and axes were the most common weapons in the Viking arsenal. Wealthier warriors, though, often wielded swords, which were a prized status item. In addition, most troops also wore a sidearm, such as the large dagger known as the sex. Once again, these were likely also decorated with intricate patterns, precious stones, and even gilding. Beyond this, nothing else is stated explicitly. However, it's hard to imagine that among their ranks none possessed legendary or at least named gear. After all, such items are widely attested to in other sagas which feature warriors bearing magical items, which include indomitable clubs treated with fire, impervious tunics fashioned from reindeer hide, or master swords with snakes that emerged from their guard. Unfortunately, such details are left to the imagination. But how did these troops come to find themselves in the ranks of the Jomsvikings in the first place? Well, as we stated, the first group got its start as a ragtag force that coalesced behind their original leader. Upon getting organized and establishing their exclusivity, they soon began launching annual campaigns across the region to win gold and glory. Word of their deeds traveled fast, and the allure of their elite community proved irresistible to men thirsting for adventure who wished to prove themselves worthy. Generating a pool of potential recruits was therefore easy. The Jomsvikings could thus afford to uphold their reputed exclusivity and accept only the best of the best who came knocking. The sagas share several examples of this process, which we shall now present. The first involves the tale of two young brothers, Sigvaldi and Thorkel. Upon hearing of this new mercenary group to the east, they pleaded with their father to help them gain admission. However, he wished that the promising youths should use this opportunity to prove themselves. They were therefore sent off, each with their own ship and a retinue of 60 men to find their own way. They took this challenge in stride. The boys now sailed up and down the coasts, ransacking and pillaging the farms that they came across until they accumulated enough supplies and wealth with which to make their grand entrance at Jomsborg. When their ships finally arrived, their presence was announced to the leader of the company, who allowed their ships to enter the harbour. The sagas then say that they were tested, a process that only half of them passed. While the 60 men who had failed sailed home, the remainder swore to faithfully uphold the tenets and the laws of the Jomsvikings. Soon afterward, another group came to join, but there was one complication. Their leader's father had been killed in the previous year's raids by Sigvaldi and Thorkel. In any other context, a blood feud would have destroyed any chance of cooperation. However, the Jomsvikings were different. With impartiality, they extended the same test to the newcomers on the one condition that they bury the hatchet of revenge. When this was agreed to, those deemed worthy were allowed to join. All now united under the code of the brotherhood. As the Jomsvikings' reputation grew, it inevitably began to attract the most fascinating of characters. Among these would be a teenage boy by the name of Vargan Åkesson. The sagas fondly describe him, saying that he was such an unruly fellow that by the time he was 9, he had already killed 3 men. At the age of 12, Vargan asked his father for a pair of ships each crewed by 60 young men between the ages of 18 and 20. These young firebrands now set off for Jomsborg, ravaging their way across Denmark, as appears to have now become tradition for potential recruits. After a long journey, they finally arrived at the fortress city with the rising sun, demanding the right to join the ranks of the legendary unit. However, because they were led by a child, the request was denied. In response, the 12-year-old Vargan challenged the Jomsviking leader directly. Such a summons could not be ignored. Thus, 2 ships sallied out to do battle with them in full view of the Brotherhood. The ensuing naval fight was apparently ferocious. Though outnumbered 2-1, Vargan's vessel managed to dance around the enemy, unleashing a rain of javelin and arrow fire on their pursuers. Forced to retreat, the Jomsvikings now landed in an attempt to regroup, but Vargan was right on their heels. The 12-year-old leapt ashore, leading his warband in a charge that pummeled them into the frozen mud. Unable to resist, they called for an end to the test. As the dust settled, 30 of the Jomsvikings were found dead, while only 3 of Vargan's men were killed. This display was good enough a test for all of them to be admitted to the Jomsvikings on the spot. As should be no surprise, Vargan would go on to become the greatest of their warriors. These sorts of hazing rituals are certainly tantalizing. Yet we must remember that the sagas are told in a Homeric style. They focus on the heroic deeds of warlords at the expense of their faceless followers, and are often prone to great exaggeration. That being said, these tales nonetheless make clear the dynamics which made the Jomsvikings so legendary. As we have seen, their exclusivity attracted a wide pool of recruits, from which only the best of the best could be selected. New inductees bore this honor as a badge of pride, thus marking the first lashing that bound them to the Jomsvikings. From then on, the connection would only grow as the strict codes of the Brotherhood served to cut loose their previous bonds, while strengthening new ones with their fellow warriors. This sense of camaraderie was paramount and would be reinforced by the equitable distribution of wealth, the limitations placed on contact with the outside world, and the banning of women from the base. Taken together, it's easy to see how this created a uniquely cohesive and formidable mercenary corps. Now, let's go on to see how this was leveraged in their service history. Tradition holds that the first man to lead the Jomsvikings was the Danish hero Palnatoke. He reportedly established their code and launched their first raids, which began to develop their reputation. However, the Jomsvikings would truly begin their ascent when Palnatoke was overthrown by the arrival of Styrbjorn the Strong, a Swedish prince in exile. He infused their ranks with new recruits and fresh ambition. Together, they now kick-started their legendary journey through the annual raiding of the Baltic coastline. The sagas describe their campaigns as follows. They go raiding every summer in various countries and gain both wealth and fame for themselves. It is said by all that, there have never been greater heroes or warriors than those Jomsvikings, and we believe that their equals have hardly been seen. They now sail from the south along the coast, not peacefully. They raid and steal wherever they go. They make large cattle raids and kill many people, and wide is the area where they burn settlements to cold embers. And they went on the warpath all the way from the south along the coast. And everyone who hears of their ravaging and is able to get away flees before it. Such success quickly snowballed, with the Jomsvikings accumulating ever more treasures and followers. This, in turn, allowed them to field more raiding ships with which to take on larger prey. Soon, they were even able to start throwing their weight around, jockeying for power with jarls, earls, and kings. Ultimately, Styrbjorn seems to have been intentionally building up his strength to make a play for Sweden, where his uncle, the suspected murderer of his father, sat on the throne. Thus, following the build-up of the Jomsvikings, he began to pressure the neighbouring Danes to assist his war aims. One source gives the absurd numbers of 1,000 ships bearing down upon the lands of Harald Bluetooth, who, in return, agreed to support Styrbjorn with 200 of his own vessels. While these claims should not be taken at face value, they do seem to indicate that the Jomsvikings were at least in a position to marshal coalition forces of substantial size. This fleet would supposedly launch an invasion of the Uppsala region of Sweden. After making initial progress, King Erik finally rose up to meet them at the Battle of Fjursvilja. It is here that the sagas state that the defending Swedes unleashed a stampede of cattle against the invaders, which they followed up with by a charge. The move disrupted the Jomsvikings, but they soon rallied and met the assault with a counter-charge. For 2 days, the fighting was said to have continued, with the forces of Styrbjorn slowly grinding their way through the army of his uncle, which was fed by a stream of reinforcements. The second night saw both sides seek the favor of the gods. One saga states that when Styrbjorn sacrificed to Thor, he was met with ill omens, but that when Erik sacrificed to Odin, a stranger appeared from the forest, bearing a reed which he was ordered to shoot over the battlefield. When he did so the next day, it transformed into a javelin, blinded the Jomsvikings whom it passed over, and unleashed an avalanche which buried them. Other sources spin similarly fanciful tales, but all seem to conclude with the defeat of the invaders and the death of Styrbjorn. In the aftermath, the Jomsvikings were left to lick their wounds and adopt a new leader. This next Jarl was known as Sigvaldi Strud Haraldsson. One of the young men whom we mentioned had originally left his home to join the crew years ago. While not as heroic as his predecessor, Sigvaldi is described as being more prudent and scheming. Under his reign, the Jomsvikings increasingly extended their influence across the north. Often, this appears to have been done by taking on a range of mercenary contracts or meddling in the geopolitics of the age. For instance, in 986, Sigvaldi would lead them on a campaign against the chiefs of Norway, who had only recently broken free from Danish rule. Either as a massive raid or invasion, the sagas claim that the Jomsvikings came with a fleet of 160 ships. These began to lay waste to the countryside, causing devastation wherever they went. A survivor from one of these attacks managed to escape to the local Jarl, Håkon the Strong, who immediately began rallying his own force of some 360 ships. When the Jomsvikings heard of the rallying point, they prepared for battle and set out to meet Håkon at a place that the sagas name as Hjörungavágr. Despite being outnumbered 2 or 3 to 1, the Jomsvikings initially had the upper hand. Their sheer fearlessness in the face of death, along with their tight-knit bonds and excellent gear, allowed them to press the Jarl's forces hard, to the point where one flank began to waver. Seeing this, the Norwegian leader turned to the gods, offering many sacrifices, including even his own daughter, to gain their favor. Sated, they sent a furious hailstorm onto the battlefield, which apparently only affected the side of the Jomsvikings. As lightning streaked the sky, the tide of battle began to shift. But rather than go down fighting, the opportunistic Sigvaldi fled. With his departure, what remained of the battle line collapsed. The Jomsvikings would never recover in numbers from this costly defeat, yet they still retained much of their ferocity and reputation. Over the next decade, this was again put to use through mercenary work for the various Scandinavian factions of the era. Though the Jomsvikings were reportedly staunch devotees of the Norse gods, their true allegiance was to gold, and so they even found themselves in the employ of Christian forces which came calling. For instance, around 1000 AD, roughly 70 Jomsviking ships accompanied Olaf Tryggvason, the Christian king of Norway, in his campaigns in Wendland. It is during this expedition that they would be ambushed by a coalition of Danes and Wends at the Battle of Sigvaldi. However, it seems that this had been a carefully laid trap. When the fighting began, the Jomsvikings turned upon Olaf's men. It was a crushing defeat for the Christians, which helped swing the pendulum of Scandinavian power back in favor of the pagan factions. This resurgence would breathe life into the Jomsvikings for another generation. During these years, Thorkel the Tall, the younger brother of Sigvaldi, would gain prominence among the Jomsvikings. By some accounts, he launched raids as far away as England. Here, they caused such grief that King Athelred was forced to pay them a substantial bribe of Danegild to cease their assaults. Soon, more money was plied their way to have them join forces with the English to repel the invasion of Svein Forkbeard. After gaining victory by their hand, however, the English king turned upon the mercenaries in a sudden slaughter. The survivors escaped and would not forget this betrayal. In 1015, they would return whilst in the service of the invading King Cnut the Great. The Jomsvikings once again proved their mettle, winning many victories. For this, Thorkel was made Earl of East Anglia, and his warband became the nucleus of Cnut's household guards. However, their success would be their ultimate undoing. Other kings saw the Jomsvikings as a dangerous threat, which might at any time be employed by their rivals to overthrow them. Such a rogue element could not be allowed to stand. Thus, when King Magnus of Norway mobilized forces against Denmark and began to consolidate power, he planned to neutralize the Jomsvikings once and for all. In 1043, the king led a great force to decisively crush the mercenaries, burning their fortress to the ground. Unfortunately, the details of this final action have been lost to the ages, and we are left to imagine the final end of the Jomsvikings amidst the flaming ruins of their stronghold. Ultimately, however, many of their former members would continue to shape the fate of the North through a continuation of their battlefield heroics, and for generations more, the legend of the Jomsvikings would live on. We hope you've enjoyed this delve into the history of one of the most fascinating band of warriors ever to set foot in the North. What units of history should we cover next? A huge thanks to the patrons for funding the channel and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.